topic here. While we were away, the United States started the process of leaving Afghanistan after a 20-year war, in which I think it's pretty safe to say that was an unwinnable war. And we have failed, like the Russians did. Sacks had a tweet that was getting a little bit of play on the old Twitter. What we're seeing before our eyes is the collapse of the American empire because the people in charge are completely corrupt and incompetent. But we can't talk about that because insiders can never criticize other insiders. The Larry Summers rule.
Did I tweet that?
You did.
Oh,
yeah, I mean, you might have had a couple of drinks. And then...
Sorry, he actually didn't. He just texted that in the group.
Okay, so that was a confidential text to our group that we're not supposed to even say exists.
Well, no, it's okay. Don't beep it. It's okay. I mean, it's true. It's not exactly what I tweeted, but it's similar to things I've been tweeting.
And tragically, yesterday, ISIS-K, which is an Afghan affiliate of the Islamic State, claimed responsibility for 2 suicide bombings outside of the airport, and that tragically killed over 100 people. 90 Afghan citizens and 13 American service members. I guess, we're not here to talk about wars. It's not exactly in the mandate, but everybody wants our opinion on this. So let's get started. Sacks, you have strong opinions. We'll start with you.
Well, it's how can you not talk about this? This feels to me, this is one of those events where, I was glued to my TV for days. I think I was in France at the time the Taliban overran Kabul. And yeah, it was, the Afghanistan war has been going on for 20 years. No one's been talking about it. It's just this thing that's been happening in the background. But all along, we've been assured by the Pentagon that we're winning. Hey, don't worry about this. We got this. And then you wake up one day and all of a sudden we've lost the war and the Taliban's overrunning the country. And you're like, what is going on here? Not only is the botched withdrawal incompetent, the fact that we were lied to for 2 decades about what was really happening, the idea that we had created, how many times were we told that we had created this Afghan army? It was 300 strong. We spent, $2 trillion in the country, and we were told the whole time that we were building institutions there, that we were creating a democracy in the Middle East, that we were even, promoting gender equality and lecturing the Taliban on toxic masculinity or something like that. And then we find out one day that poof, the whole thing was just kind of a lie. It was this giant debacle. And now we can't even get our civilians out of the country.
Not only that, but we've seen 12 American servicemen and women killed yesterday, 13 trying to protect the airport. Almost 100 Afghans. Now we'd only have to not only contend with the Taliban, whose positions I don't think any of us know about, but we also have to deal with ISIS-K, which is like some, offshoot affiliate of ISIS run by a guy who was actually summarily killed by the Taliban, but that didn't clearly stop anybody. The level of, honestly, just to say the lying that we've been doing on this topic is just utterly, it's really, really scary. How could we have gone 20 years, $2 trillion, 2,400 American lives and counting, and found a way to just basically waste all this money and tell ourselves these lies for so long? And it turns out none of it was true. And then the back half of it is that we look like a little bit of a country that's sort of in decline because we can't even figure out an orderly withdrawal. It's not as if, this thing came out of the blue, out of nowhere. This was a negotiated withdrawal. So we had months to plan for this, and we had months to do the right, honorable, moral thing for all of these, for all of these people that helped us in that country. Just to give you a small anecdote, the day that Kabul was overrun, the Democrats were actually tweeting out about celebrating Librarian Day. That's what they were focused on. Jason and I, on the way back, we flew back with my mom and my sister. We stopped in Toronto to drop them off, and the planes beside us. Jason, do you remember this?
Yeah, 2 big planes, cargo planes.
I think Brett or Paul were telling us, or my pilots were telling us, these planes had been going back and forth saving refugees in Afghanistan. And it's like, wow, what an honor to just be beside these amazingly heroic men and women. And, I don't know, Jason, if you saw, but as we were refueling, they came and boarded and they were getting ready to leave again. Wow. And meanwhile, that America cannot get even to a point of view on the topic. And I think that's what's so shameful. It's like, not only did we spend the money, not only did we lose all these lives, not only didn't we have an orderly withdrawal, we couldn't even at the end guarantee the safety of Americans or do the right thing for all these people who risk their lives to help us fight clearly a useless war.
Friedberg, you have thoughts watching all this? I know you don't like when we delve into politics too much, but what are you have any thoughts you want to add? Yeah.
I don't know if it's about politics as much as I kind of use a little bit of a startup analogy. Like America never really found product market fit with what we were trying to do in Afghanistan. There's some fantastic Gallup polling that's been done in Afghanistan over the past 15, 20 years already. And they've actually had people on the ground polling there. And most recently, which has been consistent for over 10 years, polling's shown that 87 to 90% of Afghans said that the government is corrupt. This is the government, put in place by the United States. 90% say businesses are corrupt. And if you go back to a poll they ran in 2010, the question was, in general, which of these statements comes closest to your point of view? Sharia law must be the only source of legislation. 56% of the Afghan population in 2010 believed that to be true. And another 38% said Sharia law must be a source of legislation, but not the only source. That leaves just 7% of people that think that Sharia law should not be...
Is it Sharia or Sharia?
Sharia law should not be part of the legislative process in defining the Afghan laws and constitution. And so, it's really telling that, it's almost like when you start a company and you try and create a product and you sell it to a customer base, you got to figure out what the product is. You got to make sure the customers want it. And then the idea for the startup works. The problem here is our views as a nation and maybe Western democracy doesn't necessarily fit with what that market wants. And we can certainly make the case that we believe that our ethics and our values are superior and provide more of an opportunity for individual freedom and liberty, things that we believe should be available around the world. But if the market's not buying it, the customers don't want it, you're really just raising a ton of venture money, trying to create a product that no one really wants. And at the end of the day, you're $1 trillion down and you have to shut the thing down and it goes bankrupt. And that's effectively what went down here. And if you look at the history of Afghanistan, remember, they were in the Soviet-Afghan War in the 80s, nearly the entire decade of the 80s. Then the Taliban came along and provided a degree of stability in the 90s. And then all of a sudden, this Al-Qaeda 9/11 war began, after Taliban had been in power for a year. And it's been 20 plus years of strife and 20 years of strife and challenge, where the population have increasingly viewed the government to be corrupt, businesses to be corrupt. And here's a really interesting statistic, which also came out of this polling that Gallup does. Over the last 10 years, the percentage of Afghans that are happy with their present household income has gone, or are not happy, with their present household income has gone from 60% to 90%. 9 out of 10 Afghans as of last year were not making enough money to make ends meet. So you put all of these facts together, you've got this long history of strife with this, company effectively coming in, trying to tell you how to run your government, how to run your country that doesn't match with your beliefs on the way you think a government should be built. You've got all of this turmoil that's happened historically. It really was, I would say to some degree, this inevitable failure of a startup that got overfunded, that never found product market fit, that never really got off the ground. Certainly the exit strategy on how do you wind something down in this case, and it certainly relates to human lives and the tragedy of the partners that we had on the ground, was totally mishandled. But the broader picture here is like,
I think it's more corrupt than that. I think that we basically engaged in a $2 trillion wealth transfer from the people of the United States, the citizens of the United States, to the military industrial complex. That's what we did.
Well, I mean, I have 2 points I want to build on from yours, Friedberg, and now yours, Chamath, which is the original mandate here was to go in, get rid of Al-Qaeda, and to also, kill Osama bin Laden, and to not have the Taliban giving safe harbor to Al-Qaeda. That mission got accomplished in large part in the first year or two. And then when we finally got to Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, I think it probably would have been a better idea to understand this is an unwinnable war, get in there, destroy the Taliban, leave, and then say, if you come back, we'll do it again, but we're not going to stay here for 20 years, to your point, Friedberg, and try to create a revolution if the people are not ready for it. I think that we have to start looking at our foreign policy and saying we do have a better view of human rights clearly than the Middle East and certainly Afghanistan, and we do want to promote human rights around the world and freedom.
But we're not doing that. We're not freedom fighters of democracy or justice.
We should be.
We are led by motives of revenue and profit.
I know that, but we should be. And when we went and we kicked the Nazis' asses, and we beat Japan when they were trying to dominate the world, we were doing it to stop communism. And I think when you look at nation building and these kind of revolutions, to Friedberg's point, they have to want it as well. So we should be working with the countries that are teetering on going from authoritarianism to democracy. And we should take the high ground, and we should be the moral authority of the world. Because if we're not, who's going to be?
I agree with that part, but I think the right thing to do is just to open our doors and say, you know what, we're here. There's a draft, right? And the smart and the capable and the willing, we're willing to basically bring inside of our borders so that they can work on our behalf. And that's what other countries, I think, get right about all of this stuff. Like, again, as a Canadian, the Canadian perspective of this is not that you deploy troops and you get embroiled in these debacles over 20 years and thousands of lives and trillions of dollars. It's the exact opposite. They're there to support humanitarian efforts, right? They're there to send peacekeeping forces as they need to. But otherwise, their real response is to actually then open the borders for folks that want to be there, who are then wanting to trade up, Jason, to those values, because that's the simple way to self-select. Instead of saying, I'm going to impose my version of democracy over there, I'm actually going to show you what our version looks like over here. And if you want to come, the doors are open.
Yeah. Certainly being an example is step one. And we, I think, do that largely well. But we do need to sometimes intervene. And I think that's the question here is, when is it just to intervene when there is human rights on the line and a country is teetering on authoritarianism or democracy? Like, where is that line?
The just cause here was to go get Osama bin Laden because he attacked us. And we should have gotten out of that country as soon as we realized that bin Laden was no longer there. I mean, that was basically after the Battle of Tora Bora. And if we didn't leave then, we certainly should have left after we got bin Laden in around 2010. So what were we still doing there? We were engaged in this exercise of nation building, which, by the way, we spent $6 trillion on nation building exercises in the Middle East between Afghanistan and Iraq. For what? For naught. This is why the electorate is in such a foul mood. How many of our domestic disputes are caused by the fact that we squandered that $6 trillion? That's more than Biden's entire domestic agenda. So we wasted all this money. To Friedberg's point, we never understood the culture there. And to Chamath's point, it was a giant money funneling operation to defense contractors. There's a great piece of reporting by an independent journalist named Michael Tracy, and he talked to frontline grunts about the wasteful spending. They would send 12 Humvees to some local Afghan partner. Only 2 of them would ever get there. The other 10 would break down and disappear, and no one would even know where all the money went. It was like an unbelievable orgy of wastefulness. And one other important detail on this, there's a guy who I think should be much more famous to all of us. His name is John F. Sopko. He's the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, that short for SIGAR. He was appointed by Congress about 13 years ago to look into what was really happening in Afghanistan and to report on quote unquote lessons learned from the Afghan war. And so for 13 years, Sopko has been very quietly, diligently interviewing people, everyone from frontline troops to commanders, about what's really been happening in Afghanistan. And he's been releasing these reports that everyone in DC knows about, but nobody in the country knows about. Let me just read you. These are just the chapter titles from his latest report, okay?
Oh, Jesus.
Just the chapter titles. Harmful spending patterns, resistance to honesty, personnel struggles, willful disregard for critical information, incorrect theories of change, poor understanding of local context. And by the way, that includes ignoring things like the sexual abuse of young boys by Afghan warlords who are our allies, okay, which the New York Times reported on. We completely have swept that under the rug, okay? That's just a table of contents. Okay, from one of his latest reports, which is about 100 pages.
So complete incompetence in our government, complete waste.
The Pentagon was telling us the whole time. I mean, while this guy Sopko, the Special Inspector General, was telling us the truth of what was happening, you've got the Pentagon telling us and the elected leaders the whole time that we're winning this war, that things are improving. They had all these bogus metrics to prove it, and so it's a systemic failure.
But Sacks, what would be their motivation to say it's not working?
Look, I think that, well, right. What would be the motivation?
Well, you can't fix what you don't measure. And so basically, like, if you want to lie, there you have it. We have that now for 20 years of lying.
Let's talk about the metrics, because this is actually an important point.
But this is my point. Is like, what's the objective for them to be measured? What's the objective in that case?
No, the objective is to demonstrate. No, the objective is to demonstrate leadership. The objective is to basically say, you know what, this is really not working, and this is about putting yourself in the position of a person whose child is over there. Okay, if any of our children were there who signed up because they thought they wanted to do the right thing and be in the Army or the Navy or the Marines, found themselves in Afghanistan, got killed. God, heaven forbid. And then that body comes back and this report comes with it, which is effectively what it is. Okay. This is the coda to the death of 2,400 Americans and $2 trillion. I would be so heartbroken. I am heartbroken just thinking about this. Like, that's not what we're about. So we can't keep doing this, and we can't keep lying. We can't rationalize lying anymore.
Right. Well, I agree with that. And let me just speak to the point about the metrics, because the problem was not that we didn't have any metrics. The problem is that the metrics are bogus. Now, why is that? Well, first of all, the mission was very unclear. It's not clear how you measure the success of transforming a country to Afghanistan to our values. I mean, what really are the metrics for that? So what the military started doing is not measuring outputs, but measuring inputs. So you have, the commanders on the ground saying, well, today we trained 1,000 new Afghan troops. Okay. But what they don't say is that over 90% of those troops are illiterate and 85% of them are on drugs. I mean, and this is what the journalists who were on the ground, when they would do the interviews with these frontline commanders or trainers, they would find this out. Now, why wasn't this in the report? Well, because the military is a culture that's based on advancement. It's basically, the Pentagon is a big country club. It's a big insiders club. There's a dogma. The dogma was, we're winning the war. And if you want to advance in that organization, you're not going to be the one. You're not going to be the skunk at the garden party who tells the generals that they're full of shit. You're basically going to be the guy who gives them the metrics they want to hear. And then their boss, the person who's the boss of the frontline guy, is going to improve things 20%. He's going to shade things another 20%. And then the next guy in the chain of command shades things 20%. And by the time you get all the way to the top, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is telling Biden, we have an army that's 300,000 strong. These guys are going to take over the country. We're not going to have a problem. We're going to have plenty of time to get our people out. And that is why we had a lackadaisical withdrawal strategy. These guys thought they had all the time in the world because systemically they've been bullshitting themselves about having a 300,000 man Afghan army. And then, when you actually look under the hood of this thing, there is no army. It's just basically a bunch of kleptocracy.
I think what happened at the end of this thing is even more dangerous for the future. On top of everything you said, David, which I agree with, is that what we basically said is that we will engage in whatever cover-up is necessary because we're not willing to lead and talk about the mistakes we've made and to do the things that are necessary to really fix it. And that's what's really fucking sad. Because as you said, Sacks, the minute that you knew that bin Laden wasn't there, we had a choice. Then the minute you knew that he was already dead, we had a choice, and the choice was to do the fucking right thing. And instead, what happened was we got caught up in virtue signaling. We got caught up in personal advancement. We got caught up in the grift. We got caught up in graft. We got caught up in corruption. We got caught up in the, military industrial complex. And here's where we are. And the crazy thing is Biden had a moment where he could have stepped in and said, you know what, guys, I'm looking at all of this data. Here's the new plan. And he didn't do it either.
Let me ask you a question. If Biden had run an orderly exit and then it spiraled into Taliban and reverted back to what it was. How would you feel about all this, Sacks?
I think
that would have been, that's the goal, right? Trump wanted to get out,
yes,
and Biden both wanted to get out. So if we just executed twice as good or 50% better, there'd be no problem here. We all want to be out, correct?
Yes, that decision, the decision to get out was a 70% popular decision when Biden made the decision in April, and then they
and when Trump made it last time, because he did the ceasefire, he negotiated.
This is a bipartisan decision to get out. Let's not pretend otherwise. It was clearly the correct decision to get out, but here's where Biden screwed it up. Okay, and there's some blame that needs to be apportioned to Biden and to the generals, and we don't really know who screwed it up, but collectively they did. The big mistake, the original sin of this withdrawal, is that they pulled out of Bagram Airfield at the beginning of July. Okay, they didn't just pull out; they literally ghosted the Afghan. I mean, they pulled out in the middle of the night without telling anybody. The Afghans army, who are our allies, woke up the next morning, and the Americans were just gone, and the electricity had been turned off. I mean, this was unbelievable. And so the problem is we then lost our air superiority over the country. We lost our ability to conduct close combat air support. We lost our ability to do a mass evacuation. Okay. We basically gave up our central military asset in the country before we got the civilians out, before we got our allies out. And there were 18,000 of these so-called CIVs, the special immigration visas. These are the Afghani translators and helpers who were embedded in our combat units. The State Department, meanwhile, was totally caught up in bureaucracy, slow walking their applications. Those 18,000 translators are now stuck there. Okay. They have 50,000 dependents. We're talking about spouses and children. And so they have no way of getting out. And then the final thing that just takes the cake is that we gave a list to the Taliban of here's our biggest helpers. If they go to the checkpoints, we want you to let them through.
Oh my Lord. So it was basically an assassination list. This is your death list.
They've given a kill list to the Taliban. Yeah. I mean, this is really unforgivable. And it's not like this was unknown. Okay. There was a bipartisan working group of both Democrats and Republicans who wrote a letter to Blinken at the State Department back in May saying, we are afraid about the safety of our Afghan allies. You need to get them out now. The State Department is taking too long processing the special immigration visas. You're totally caught up in red tape bureaucracies. Solve this problem. Blinken did nothing. He was another deer caught in the headlights.
They could have also just, instead of making people fill out all these forms and all this red tape, I heard one commenter saying, like, the right thing to do in situations like this is to just get everybody out, put them in a holding location, and then process them there. In other words, if this person says they're translating their family and they have, relatively good paperwork, get them out, put them into that holding pattern, and then figure out how to process them later. We got to wrap on this discussion, get to some other topics. But the interesting thing to watch here is what's going to be the future of Afghanistan. And I don't know if you guys saw the Financial Times story, but